After watching these stories, don't forget to write what you would have done in the main character's place. Now, let's move on to the stories. In Chandler and Ro's room, the lamp glows. They have just finished watching a movie. Ro, comfortably settled on the couch, wraps herself in a blanket, while Chandler gets ready to leave. Chandler, I'll quickly run to get Mark, he's late again. As usual. Ro, don't forget to bring chips. Chandler, as always. Don't miss me too much, okay? They hug, and Chandler leaves. The door closes, leaving Ro alone with the silence. The camera slowly moves around the room, showcasing a cozy interior, photographs of the couple on the walls, books on the shelves, but with each moment Ro is alone, the atmosphere becomes more tense. Ro picks up her phone, but there's no signal. She remembers receiving a strange call during the day, but no one answered. Ro, why am I so worried? She tries to calm herself, lights a candle, and slowly walks to the window to see if Chandler has returned. Ro feels that something is off in the air. She hears sounds outside, something unsettling, but it's hard to identify what exactly. She turns back to the room and hears strange noises again, resembling quiet knocks. She tries to calm down, but her heart is racing. She decides to make herself some tea to distract herself. While preparing the drink, she hears the indistinct sounds again, coming from the basement. Ro, maybe it's just the neighbor's cats, but her intuition suggests it's something more. She gathers the courage for a quick check. Descending to the basement, Ro presses the light switch, but the lamp flickers and goes out. Only in the darkness does she notice a shadow quickly disappearing. Her heart races with fear. Ro, Chandler, are you here? She hears someone quietly laughing, a sound that makes her shudder. She rushes back to the room, feeling that something is wrong again. She tries to contact Chandler, but there's still no signal. Knocking is heard again, now closer, and she feels fear penetrate her body. She turns to the window, but outside, darkness seems to swallow everything around. Ro, this can't be. At that moment, her phone suddenly buzzes with a message notification. I'm coming for you. You're not alone. Ro feels a chill run down her spine. In a panic, she dials Chandler's last call, but his voicemail answers. Ro, Chandler, where are you? Ro hears something knocking in the hallway again, and she finally realizes she's not alone. She tries to find something to protect herself, and a kitchen knife comes to mind. The girl desperately tries to figure out what to do next as the shadow gets closer. The shadow in the hallway freezes, and Ro hears someone laughing softly. That sound makes her stomach turn with fear. She decisively approaches the door, gripping the knife, her heart pounding in sync with her fear. Ro, I know you're there. Show yourself. No one answers, but the laughter echoes again, this time louder. Ro feels her brain sound the alarm. Suddenly, she remembers her phone and tries to call Chandler again. But unfortunately, there's no signal. Ro, Chandler, please come back. She starts thinking about how she's alone in this big house, how she's always feared being left alone. Her eyes dart around the room, trying to find anything that could help her. Finally, her gaze lands on a heavy vase on the table. Ro, gathering herself again, approaches the door and decisively opens it. She steps into the hallway, but no one appears. She only hears her heart beating in the silence. Ro, why am I so scared? It's just fear. She enters the room, and suddenly a shadow appears behind her. She turns to see a stranger standing in the doorway. His face is obscured by a hood, and his hands are in his pockets. Stranger, all alone? How terrifying. Ro tries to stay calm. Ro, who are you? What do you want? Stranger, just wanted to chat. Are you really all alone? Ro feels coldness pierce her, and she quickly raises the knife, ready to act. Ro, step back. I'll call the police. Stranger, I don't believe you'll do that. Your phone is dead, and there's no signal here. She panics as the stranger moves closer. Ro tries to keep calm, though her heart races faster. Ro, I'm not afraid of you. Stranger, really? Then why are you holding that knife like it's your last hope? At that moment, she feels tears welling up in her eyes. Ro, you don't know who you're dealing with. Stranger, I can only imagine. Your boyfriend is lost somewhere, isn't he? How does it feel to be left alone? Ro stands still, realizing the stranger can sense her fear and is trying to play with her emotions. Ro, I'll find a way to escape. She backs away, trying to find an opportunity to flee, but the stranger moves after her. Stranger, you're not going anywhere. This night is just beginning. Ro, feeling adrenaline in her blood, suddenly turns and runs back to the room. She slams the door and places the vase on the handle to keep him out, but the stranger understands her intent and starts banging on the door. Stranger, You can't hide from me. Ro quickly scans the room, her thoughts racing. She thinks about escaping through the window, but fear holds her back. She realizes she needs a plan. Ro, what do I do? She remembers there's an old back exit through the yard. Quickly deciding, she rushes to the window and opens it, trying to focus. Ro, I have to do this. She watches the stranger banging on the door, and suddenly hears a sound, like someone entering the room. Ro takes a breath, leaps through the window, and lands on the ground, hearing the heavy footsteps of the stranger behind her. Ro, I have to get to the car. She sprints across the yard, her heart pounding, legs trying not to trip on the uneven ground. She hears the stranger exiting the house, laughing, but at that moment she reaches her car. Ro, why won't it work? She presses the handle over and over again, and then feels something behind her, something indescribably terrifying. Ro finally opens the door, jumps inside, and tries to shut it just as the stranger approaches. Stranger, you can't escape me. Ro slams the door shut, but he manages to wedge his hand between the doors. She presses down hard, trying to close the door as her heart continues to hammer from fear. She quickly turns the key in the lock and starts the engine. Ro, go away. She floors the gas, and the car jerks forward, leaving the stranger behind. She escapes, but something inside her keeps sounding the alarm. After the climax, Ro tries to calm down as she drives away. Her thoughts are on Chandler, who still hasn't returned, making her think the danger isn't over yet. Ro, I have to find him. I can't leave him alone. She decides to go back home, though deep down she feels it might be dangerous. She turns on the navigator and heads back, but as she passes their house, she notices the doors are open. Ro, no, no, no. Chandler. She gets out of the car, feeling fear creeping back into her heart. Ro, Chandler, are you here? She rushes into the house, but its emptiness scares her. Ro, where are you? She starts searching the rooms, her heart pounding with fear and despair. Every corner seems dangerous. Thoughts of the stranger return, and she feels panic rising again. Ro, Chandler. She descends to the basement, where she last saw the stranger. As she enters, cold darkness envelops her. She tries to stay calm, but her heart still pounds in her temples. Ro hears something behind her. Someone is coming. She turns, trying to see who it is, but the darkness hides everything. Ro, who's there? Suddenly, the light in the basement flickers on, and she sees Chandler standing on the stairs with a very worried expression. Chandler, Ro? Why didn't you come back? Ro, I was looking for you. There was a stranger. Chandler, what happened? Are you okay? She looks at him, trying to calm down, but emotions overwhelm her. Ro, I saw him. He tried to. Suddenly, they hear a loud crash, and the basement door bursts open. They turn to see the stranger entering, grinning ominously. Stranger, thought you could hide? Chandler, who are you? Ro, Chandler, go. The stranger moves closer, and Ro realizes this is their last chance. She grabs the remaining knife on the table and stands in front of Chandler, ready to protect him. Ro, you won't have us. Chandler tries to pull her back, but she knows she must do this. The stranger laughs, and suddenly Ro feels everything might end horribly. She quickly grabs Chandler by the hand and pulls him up through the secret exit they once talked about. Ro, faster. They start running while the stranger lags behind, but as they try to escape, he is still following them, laughing. Stranger, you can't run from your fear. Chandler and Ro, fleeing, stop for a moment, and Chandler turns to see if the stranger has appeared. Chandler, we need to find the car. They rush back to the car, but just as they reach it, Ro feels an invisible force stopping her. She turns and sees the stranger coming closer. Ro, no, no, no. Chandler tries to pull Ro away, but she can't take it anymore. She realizes this is their last chance. Ro, I have to stop him. She pushes Chandler back and approaches the stranger, knife in hand. She's ready to fight for her life. Stranger, there you are. Ro desperately lunges at the stranger, but he catches her wrist, pushing her back with force. Ro, let me go. Chandler, without hesitation, charges at the stranger, trying to pull him away from Ro. They both struggle as Ro tries to free the knife. Chandler, Ro, go. Ro finally frees the knife and tries to strike again, but the stranger manages to grab her. He pushes Chandler away, and he falls to the ground. Ro, Chandler. She desperately rushes at the stranger and finally manages to stab him in the arm. The knife sinks into his shoulder, but it doesn't stop him. Stranger, you think that will stop me? Ro feels fear pierce through her as she sees the stranger trying to pull the knife from his shoulder while she grapples with panic. Chandler, Ro, it's dangerous, but she can't stop. In a fierce struggle, They both grab the stranger together. Ro uses all her strength to protect herself and Chandler. They wrestle, trying to hold the stranger down. Eventually, the stranger collapses to the ground, exhausted, but instead of stepping back, Ro stays with him, realizing this isn't the end. Ro, what do you want? Ro, what do you want? Stranger, you'll find out. The end. Ro and Chandler, though victorious. Jack, a 14-year-old teenager, sat in his room, immersed in a world of lessons, computer games, and movies. His parents had gone away for the weekend, leaving him home alone, which allowed him to enjoy freedom without restrictions. He finished his homework and then decided to unwind by playing his Jack. Jack, a 14-year-old teenager, sat in his room, immersed in a world of lessons, computer games, and movies. His parents had gone away for the weekend, leaving him home alone, which allowed him to enjoy freedom without restrictions. He finished his homework and then decided to unwind by playing his favorite computer game. The atmosphere in the room was typical: the sound of keyboard clicks, the flickering of the screen, and a faint sound from the speakers. The evening light gradually shifted to night, but Jack felt no fear. He liked being alone since it was time for fun. After turning on a horror movie, he laughed at the screaming scenes and tried to figure out why the characters always did stupid things instead of running away from danger. However, suddenly his attention was caught by a sound that was completely different from the noises in the movie. He closed his computer, hoping it was just his imagination, and listened to what was happening outside the walls. Jack couldn't be mistaken. Someone had knocked on the door. The twist: who could it be? Jack thought, his heart suddenly racing. His parents hadn't mentioned they might return early, and friends usually didn't drop by unannounced. Remembering scenes from movies where heroes always ignored warning signals, he decided he couldn't stay in his room. Jack slowly approached the door, trying to be quiet. Outside, it became silent, but the knocking repeated, this time with a more persistent tone. Jack felt fear beginning to creep in. He knew it could be dangerous, but curiosity won out. He peeked through the window, trying to see who was there, but darkness obscured his view, and he couldn't make anything out. Clenching his fists, Jack turned back to the door, feeling a chill of fear again. Maybe it's just a neighbor or some courier, he tried to reassure himself, but deep down, he sensed that something was wrong. The anxiety grew, and Jack, trying to compose himself, decided to open the door. His hands trembled as he placed his fingers on the doorknob. Was it worth the risk? The boy closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Finally, he opened the door and looked at the threshold. No one stood at the door, but the air was filled with an unexplainable tension. Jack peered into the night, hoping to see someone familiar, but the threshold remained empty. Then he heard a rustling sound, as if someone had walked by. Jack felt cold sweat appear on his forehead. His heart stopped, and he closed the door again. Feeling fear engulfed him, Jack realized that staying home alone was no longer just a fun game but a real danger that could lurk around every corner. Jack felt his heart racing wildly in his chest. He couldn't believe that his peaceful evening had turned into something terrifying. Overcoming his fear, the boy decided he needed to find out what was happening. He looked out the window again, hoping to see who or what was at the door. However, the night remained dark, and he couldn't make anything out. He turned back to his room, feeling chaos building in his mind. Should he call his parents? No, they weren't home. Maybe he should call the police? That sounded wise, but Jack decided it wasn't time to panic just yet. He tried to remember if he had any means of protection. Suddenly, his gaze landed on a small knife he used for opening packages. Grabbing the knife, Jack felt he needed to be ready for anything. He returned to the door, gripping the handle tightly. As he listened again, the rustling sound repeated, now closer. Jack felt horror creeping in, but along with it came the realization that he couldn't just stand there waiting. The climax: the boy decided to step outside and check what was happening on the street. He cautiously opened the door and stepped onto the threshold. The darkness around him felt so thick that Jack felt as if he had entered an abyss, but fear wouldn't let him stop. He began to move slowly down the stairs, listening to every sound. Suddenly, he noticed a shadow quickly darting down the street. That can't be a regular passerby, Jack thought, watching as the figure disappeared around the corner. He realized he couldn't stay in place. His heart pounded like a drum as he started moving in the direction where the shadow had vanished. When Jack turned the corner, he saw a man standing at the end of the street, motionless. His dark hood completely obscured his face. The boy felt cold shivers run down his spine. Could this be the same maniac he had heard about in the news? He decided to back away, but suddenly the man turned towards him. "Jack!" came a voice he recognized. It was his neighbor, Mr. Coster. Jack felt a wave of relief, but still sensed a threat. "I saw you were home alone, so I thought I'd check if everything was alright. You didn't answer my calls," Mr. Coster explained, gradually approaching, but there was a strange stubbornness in his eyes, something that made Jack uneasy. "I'm fine," the boy replied, trying to hide his fear, but something about his neighbor's behavior set off alarms in his mind. Why did he look so unusual? Why was there so much tension in his voice? Not knowing what to do, Jack tried to back away, but suddenly felt something cold touch his back. It was a knife. The boy realized that the man he had known all his life could actually be dangerous. "Now you'll understand what it means to be truly alone," Mr. Coster whispered, pushing Jack back into the darkness. The boy screamed, but his voice was lost in the night air as he realized that his fear had become a reality. In that moment, Jack understood. His peaceful evening, filled with games and movies, had turned into a real nightmare, where the threat was closer than he had thought. Now he needed to find a way to escape this trap and survive. At that moment, when Jack felt the cold metal against his back, the last spark of determination ignited within him. He couldn't allow himself to give up. Trying to ignore his fear, the boy quickly remembered the knife he held in his hand. Suddenly, he turned and struck Mr. Coster's wrist with all his might, forcing him to drop the knife. The man, shocked and confused, stepped back a few paces. This gave Jack the necessary time. He bolted back into his house, his heart racing in his chest. Closing the door behind him, he locked it and, breathing rapidly, jumped to the window. Jack pressed on his phone and dialed the police. Every second felt like an eternity, but finally, the line connected, and he explained the situation. The officers assured him they were on their way and asked him to stay where he was. When Jack took his eyes off the phone, he saw the man approach his door again. "Jack, open up. It's me, Mr. Coster. You don't want me to leave, do you?" he shouted, but there was no longer the familiar friendliness in his voice. The boy realized this was not the neighbor he had known. Suddenly, flickering lights appeared in the darkness outside the window. Jack heard the sounds of police sirens. The police had arrived. When they entered the house, Jack pointed to the door where his neighbor stood with relief. The officers quickly apprehended Mr. Coster, who was trying to escape. It turned out that the man had been stalking Jack for a long time, and his behavior was unpredictable and dangerous. Epilogue: a few days after the life-changing events, Jack sat in the living room with his parents. They embraced him, thanking him for staying safe. The boy felt the fear gradually dissipating, but deep down, he understood that this experience would always remain with him. He found the strength to share his story with friends at school, urging them to be cautious and always mindful of strangers. Jack realized that anyone could become a victim of danger, but it was important to know how to react in critical situations. Over time, he learned about not just physical safety but emotional safety as well. His experience changed his perspective on the world. Jack discovered new interests, and his life became richer and more diverse. And although he still had fears, Jack no longer felt powerless. He grew into a mature young man, ready to face life's challenges, whatever they may be. Now, as he sat down to study, watched movies, or played video games, one important truth remained with him: it matters not only what happens around you but also how you respond to it.